right, are we programmed to punch? Like, is violence just part of who we are as humans? That's the deep dive we're taking today.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Yeah. And we've got a ton of your research and articles and notes and everything, so let's get into it. It's like the classic nature versus nurture debate, right?
Yeah.
But it's probably way more complicated than just picking a side.
Oh, for sure. It's not as simple as just saying, oh, it's genes or it's your upbringing.
Right. So let's start with the nature side. Like the idea that maybe way back when, aggression actually helped us survive.
Right. If you think about our early ancestors, imagine them trying to survive in a world full of, like, predators.
Yeah.
Limited resources. Being aggressive might have been what kept them alive.
Totally. You don't want to be the shy cave person when there's like a saber-toothed tiger
Exactly.
lurking around.
Yeah. Aggression would have been a huge advantage, protecting themselves, their families, all that.
Right, passing those traits down. But just because something helped us survive back then, does that mean we're stuck with it now?
Well, that's the thing. Evolution is fascinating, but it doesn't mean our fate is sealed.
Okay, so genes aren't the whole story.
It's not that simple. Genes are more like a blueprint. They give you the basic structure. But how that structure actually ends up, that depends on the environment, on experiences, on choices.
Right, like how the blueprint gets built, not just the blueprint itself.
Exactly. We know certain genes are linked to aggression, like those dealing with serotonin and dopamine. But having those genes doesn't make you a violent person.
Okay, so it's not like a guarantee, more like a possibility. What about the brain itself? Does that factor in?
Of course. The brain's a major player in all of this. Like the amygdala, it's the part that deals with threats and fear.
Okay.
It can be super active in people who are prone to aggression.
Does that mean an active amygdala equals violence?
Not necessarily. It's just one piece of a very complex puzzle.
Okay, so biology lays the groundwork, but then there's the nurture side of things.
Right.
The experiences we have, especially as kids, can shape how we deal with aggression.
Right. Absolutely. And that's where things get really interesting. Think about Bandura's social learning theory. We learn by watching other people.
Right, like monkey see, monkey do.
Exactly. Imagine a kid who grows up surrounded by violence. At home, in their neighborhood.
Yeah.
They start to see violence as a normal way to solve problems.
That's a scary thought, and it's backed up by studies, right? Like, kids who see domestic violence are more likely to be violent themselves later on.
It's a tragic cycle, for sure.
It is.
And it's not just within families. Different cultures have totally different ideas about violence, what's acceptable, what's not.
Oh, so like different cultures have different rules of the game for how to deal with conflict.
Precisely. Some are more tolerant of aggression. Some even encourage it in certain situations, like competition or, certain rituals.
So we've got this mix of biology and culture. Yeah. But we can't forget about trauma, right? Abuse, neglect, witnessing violence. These things can have a huge impact.
They absolutely can. These experiences can leave deep scars.
Are you saying those scars can actually change how we react to situations?
Exactly. It's like our brains get rewired, making us more sensitive to threats.
And that makes us more likely to lash out.
It can, yes. But it's not inevitable. Resilience is a powerful thing.
Okay, good. So trauma doesn't mean someone's destined for a life of violence.
Right. Having strong support systems, resources, positive influences, these can make a world of difference.
So there's hope for change.
Always. Even with a difficult starting point, the right support can help people break free from those patterns.
Okay, so we've got nature setting the stage and nurture shaping the performance.
Yeah, good analogy.
But how do these two things actually work together in our brains?
Think of it this way. Genes give you the ingredients, but the environment, your experiences, they're the chef who decides what to do with those ingredients.
I like that. And that brings us to epigenetics, right?
Exactly.
What was that again? Remind me.
Epigenetics is the study of how our experiences can actually switch certain genes on or off.
Oh, wow. So it's not just about what genes you have, but whether they're actually active.
Precisely. Imagine something like childhood trauma. That could activate genes related to aggression.
So trauma can actually change how our genes work. That's crazy.
It is. And the amazing thing is, positive experiences can also have epigenetic effects.
So good things can turn those bad genes off.
It's possible, yes. We're not just puppets of our genes or our environment. It's this constant interplay.
It's less about nature versus nurture and more like nature through nurture.
Exactly. A constant dance between the two.
Okay, so we've looked at individuals, but what about the bigger picture? How does society itself play a role in all of this?
That's a great question, and it's a huge part of the puzzle.
Okay, let's talk about that after a quick break.
Sounds good. Welcome back. We're in the middle of a deep dive into what makes us violent. Is it nature? Is it nurture? It's complicated, right?
Super complicated. And we've got a ton of questions from you guys, especially about specific types of violence.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of people are wondering about violent video games. Do they actually make people more aggressive?
It's a big question, and it's been around forever. The research is kind of all over the place.
Really?
Yeah, some studies show a connection, like playing these games and then having more aggressive thoughts, feelings, even actions.
So there is some evidence that virtual violence can lead to real-world aggression.
But it's not a slam dunk, and then there are the studies that don't really find much of a link.
So what's the deal? If there is a connection, how does that even work?
Yeah.
Do these games rewire our brains or something?
One idea is desensitization. A lot of these games, you get rewarded for violence. You win, you level up, all through aggression.
Right.
Over time, that could make you less sensitive to the real consequences of violence.
So you're training your brain to see violence as a solution, even if it's just in a game.
Yeah, something like that. But then wouldn't that apply to other violent media too, like movies?
That's what I was thinking.
Exactly. That's why researchers are looking at what makes video games unique.
So what is it?
It could be the interactivity. You're not just watching violence, you're actively participating.
Right. You're making choices that lead to that violence.
And that could have a stronger effect on your brain.
But then I also read that video games can be good for you. Like, they can improve hand-eye coordination and problem-solving skills.
Right. There are potential benefits too.
So how do we reconcile those with the potential for increased aggression?
This is where it gets really nuanced. The effects probably depend on a bunch of things. The person's personality, how much they play, what kind of games they're playing.
Right. It's not the same for everyone.
Exactly. And most importantly, the vast majority of people who play these games don't become violent criminals.
It's good to hear.
Yeah, we can't just say video games equal violence, because that's not true.
Right. It's more complicated than that.
It's a correlation, not necessarily a cause.
Okay, so moderation and context are key. It's like too much of anything can be bad for you.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Let's switch gears a bit and talk about another type of violence that's often in the news. Domestic violence.
It's a tough topic, but an important one.
Absolutely. It's so pervasive, and often it's hidden from view.
It's about power and control.
Yeah.
The abuser uses violence, could be physical, emotional, whatever, to control their partner.
And it happens to people of all genders and backgrounds.
That's really important to remember. It's not just a women's issue or anything like that.
Right. It affects everyone.
Yeah, and the impact goes beyond the immediate victim. Children who witness this violence, they're at risk too.
It's like this ripple effect spreading outward.
Exactly. And that's why addressing domestic violence is so important. It's not just about protecting the victims, it's about breaking the cycle of violence.
So it's about prevention as much as it is about intervention.
Precisely.
Another question we got a lot is about gang violence. What makes people join gangs in the first place?
For a lot of young people, especially those who feel lost or marginalized, gangs offer a sense of belonging.
It's a twisted sense of community.
Right, but it fills a void for some. They're looking for acceptance, protection, maybe even a purpose.
And then the violence becomes a way to maintain power and control.
It's a dangerous mix of desperation, loyalty, and fear.
Once you're in that world, it must be so hard to get out.
It is. And that's why addressing gang violence requires a multifaceted approach.
It's not just about law enforcement. It's about tackling the root causes, the social and economic factors that push people towards gangs.
Exactly. We need to give them alternatives, hope for a future outside of that world.
So better opportunities for education, jobs, things like that.
Exactly. Give them a chance to succeed without resorting to violence.
Man, we've covered some heavy stuff today.
We have. But it's important to talk about these things.
Absolutely. And understanding the problem is the first step to finding solutions.
Exactly. And in the last part of our deep dive, we'll focus on those solutions. What can we actually do to build a more peaceful world? Stay tuned.
Okay, deep divers. We're back for the final part of our exploration into violence. We've talked about why it happens, but now the big question. What do we do about it?
It's time to shift gears from understanding to action, right? From analyzing to actually doing something.
Exactly. And one of the ideas that keeps coming up is restorative justice. Can you tell us more about what that is and why it matters?
Restorative justice, it's a way of dealing with crime and harm that's not just about punishment.
Okay.
It's about repairing relationships, rebuilding communities, bringing together victims, offenders, and the community to have a conversation, figure out how to make things right.
So it's more about healing than punishing.
Exactly. It recognizes that crime, it doesn't just break the law, it breaks the trust and relationships within a community.
And by bringing everyone together, you can start to mend those broken pieces.
That's the idea. It's not easy, though.
I can imagine. Getting victims and offenders in the same room, that must be incredibly difficult.
It takes a lot of courage from everyone involved. A willingness to listen, to empathize.
Yeah, to really see the other person's perspective.
But when it works, it can be powerful. It can help everyone heal and move forward.
Do you have an example of what this might look like in real life?
Sure. Imagine a kid who vandalizes a school. In a traditional system, they'd get arrested, maybe go to court.
Right, the typical punishment route.
But with restorative justice, they'd sit down with the principal, teachers, maybe even other students.
Wow, so they have to face the people they hurt.
Exactly. They hear firsthand about the impact of their actions.
And they have to take responsibility.
Right. And then they work together to figure out how to repair the harm. Maybe they clean up the graffiti, do community service, something to make amends.
So it's about accountability, but also about giving them a chance to redeem themselves.
Exactly. And it's not just about the offender. Victims also have a voice in this process.
So they get to express how they've been affected.
Yes. And often just being heard, being acknowledged, that can be incredibly healing for them.
It sounds like restorative justice is really about shifting the whole mindset from us versus them to we're all in this together.
That's a great way to put it. It's about building bridges instead of walls.
Okay, so restorative justice is one piece of the puzzle. We've also talked about early intervention. What does that involve?
Early intervention is all about catching those risk factors for violence before they become serious problems.
So like identifying kids who might be on a path towards violence and intervening early.
Exactly. It could be programs that teach emotional regulation skills, conflict resolution.
Okay, so giving them healthy ways to deal with anger and frustration.
Exactly. Creating a safe space for them to talk about their feelings, get support when they need it.
And these programs could be in schools, community centers, right?
Anywhere where young people gather. It's about building resilience from a young age.
Equipping them with the tools to make good choices.
Right. And it's not just about preventing violence. It's about promoting mental health and well-being overall.
Okay, so we've got restorative justice and early intervention. But even with all the best programs, violence is still going to happen. So what can we do as individuals to create a more peaceful world?
It starts with empathy, really trying to understand other people's perspective.
Even if we don't agree with them.
Especially if we don't agree with them. It's easy to judge, to demonize people who think differently.
Yeah, especially in today's world where everything feels so polarized.
Exactly. But empathy, it's about resisting that urge to judge. It's about remembering that we're all human. We all have our own stories, our own struggles.
We might disagree on things, but we can still try to see the world through each other's eyes.
Right. And that can be the starting point for understanding, for connection.
So how do we cultivate empathy? Where do we even begin?
It starts with listening. Really listening to understand, not just to respond.
And seeking out diverse perspectives, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Stepping outside our comfort zones, our echo chambers.
Remembering that we're all part of the same human story.
Beautifully said. And that's how we start to build a more peaceful world. One conversation, one act of kindness at a time.
Wow, that's a powerful message. We've covered so much ground in this deep dive.
We have.
From the biology of aggression to the role of society, and most importantly, what we can do to break the cycle of violence.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has. So deep divers, as we wrap up, I hope you feel empowered to take what you've learned and apply it to your own lives.
Whether it's practicing empathy, advocating for change, or just having these tough conversations.
Every little bit helps.
Exactly.
Thanks for joining us on this exploration. And remember, building a more peaceful world, it's a marathon, not a sprint. We can do it together.
Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay hopeful.